It's that time of year again, so let's bash a monster. We'll workshop that line for next time. Monster Bash, if you haven't had the pleasure, is a collaborative yearly project where a bunch of weirdos draw some monster bits and body parts. Or at this point, just go absolutely hog wild and draw whatever awful, torturous material they feel like. We are definitely looking at you, Ames. And then we each pull 6 cards randomly from the deck and use those to inspire our monster. We hopped on a call to make our pulls, and despite the fact that you can now witness a woman who's used technology for the majority of the last 30 years not be able to pause a video on her phone multiple times in a row, we did manage to get some cards. So I got a couple of textures from Caffeinated Miniatures, a leaf pattern and some grass is what I see in them, then a branch featuring Tiny Worm. You can see the theme emerging here, can't you? And then this thing from Terran. Again, kind of planty, kind of horrible, deadly parasite vibes. And then we have this rather wide face. And lastly, an eyeball mouth from Zambies. We've got our cards, and whilst I am majorly pissed that I didn't get the Columbo card, come on now, we still got some good ones. So we just got to figure it out, right? If you didn't see it, last year my Monster Bash was slightly unhinged, which is, I mean, the way that I like to do most things, I guess. But the cards that I drew, I think everyone agreed at the time, were quite difficult, let's say. But at the same time, it's almost easier when you get weird cards because, I mean, what else could I really have done than what I did with those? This year, they're so matchy that I'm struggling to come up with something interesting. But where I think I'm going to start is with this kit. This was my Spirit of Durthu kit, and it's one of those GW models that comes with multiple variations. Let me show you. Okay, I'm just going to show you, it's easier. So I've already made this Durthu right here. Although I did use a different head because, don't sue me, I just didn't like that one. And that means I have all the other bits to play with because there are so many selections, including an extra hand. And what do we hate making ourselves? Hands. If I can get out of sculpting one, that is a good day for me. So we're going to cut a bunch of these bits and see where that gets us. To start. In my last video, I made a base for the Monster Bash, some magical trees, which I'll link below if you'd like to see how I made them. First, I traced out the space I had left on the swamp part of the base to make sure I can actually fit this thing on there when it's done. So to go with that and use my cards as best I can, I think I'm going to try for a kind of tree spirit, NT dude being split open and taken over by a bunch of wormy parasites, with eyeballs in their mouths, of course. I chopped out some choice bits from the kit, including the Durthu head I didn't use, and a little actual non-parasite worm, just like in our branch card. I ended up grabbing some other miscellaneous Sylvaneth bits from my stash too. When perusing the bits, I thought it might help if we had multiple of some of them, so what better time to test the Oyumaru I was given recently. It's basically a thermoplastic that you can heat up and use to make push molds, and people have been using it to recast Warhammer for a long time. I heated it up in some boiling water and pressed the bits in halfway. This sexy, leafy loincloth was what I was most interested in copying, but tried some faces and the hand as an experiment, being fairly sure I wouldn't get a good casting from them, but valiantly continuing nonetheless. Once the first half was cool, I smooshed on the other side. After that was set, I evicted the originals and crammed in some milliput before leaving them to set for a few hours. Half of them crumbled as I thought they might, but the loincloth prevailed. With that success, it was time to get the monster started for real. I started with an armature of tinfoil and wire, making sure to reference my size template. Looks like this lad's been on the NHS waiting list for a spiniectomy for so long that we're going to have to carbon date his referral letter. But don't worry bud, you'll make a full recovery. And that pesky spine will come in handy for us. Do trees have spines? Well, this one bloody does, alright. After a bit more tinkering, I had a form with arms and a couple of neck pieces. He's going to be emerging from the lake, so we only really need the top half of the body here. And if you think that's a cop-out, well, I didn't get any leg cards, and I made more than enough leg last year, so shush you. Once we had the spine in place, I could whip out the loincloths. Now, these won't be covering the usual kind of wood you might expect. Oh no, these will make lovely back plates, being torn asunder to reveal our masses of squirming pals erupting from the tree body. Then I attached the hand we had from the kit with plenty of superglue and baking soda, and next was the scary part. For the wide face card, I'm choosing to make the face widely split apart. Trying not to make a total arse out of it was about as panic-inducing as getting the text from your mum asking if you took the chicken out the freezer earlier. It turned out okay though. The same can't be said for me and my dinner that was still more solid than the ice caps. With the backs and fronts together and some green stuff textured to fill in the gaps, I could stick them on too. I built up the necks with a wee bit more just to make sure they wouldn't ping off and go skiting across the floor in the next steps. I used my roll maker, this is the large one, to quickly texture my green stuff worms. This thing is a lifesaver for doing this quickly. I like to use it in different directions and with different amounts of force and thicknesses so that I get a variety of textures. I didn't want all the worms looking exactly the same or else they'd start to blend into each other. I did the same to some green stuff with wire through it, glued on some eyeballs I had in my bits box and sculpted some lip-esque shapes around them, ticking off our card from Zambies. I fixed these onto the back of the monster, but I did need to use this wire splint until it cured to keep it in place. Geez, with all the procedures I'm doing today, you might as well call me Dr. Lexter. You get it? Like Lecter? Kind of, right? Just don't ask me to do my Clarice Starling impression. I filled out more space with worms and really piled them up in the middle. I wanted it to look like this guy was really full of these things, being completely taken over until there was just no space left and he burst, spilling them out all over the shop. I know it's a bit off topic, but the whole time I was doing this, I was thinking about my favourite guilty pleasure trashy reality show, Alone. They leave people out in the wilderness to fend for themselves with nothing to survive, and one guy found a dead bird full, and I mean full to the gunnels, to the absolute brim with worms. And he ate it. He bloody well ate it. I am so sorry to give you that mental image, but if I had to see it, then now you have to have it in your brain too, because I will be haunted by it forever. Welcome to the club. I won't go into too much detail on how I do my bark with hot glue, since I did a whole tutorial on it in my last video, but basically I use the hot end to scribe in texture as it sets. I pushed in some more bits, the same as I did for the base trees, so it would look consistent. Like this tree also had the surrounding tree folk and unsuspecting victims merged back into the bark and grown over. Like Hansi Pete copping a feel over here, who clearly died whilst taking the phrase tree hugger to new heights. Look, we couldn't make a monster bash without something kinda sexy, could we? With some more texturing and more bits though, he was starting to come together, which was a poor choice of phrasing after my previous comment about making it sexy, so let's move swiftly on to adding our little friendly worm. To me, he's the embodiment of how you feel as the normal one when your crazy family comes roaring into an event and you have to pretend you're not related. You mean that guy calling himself Uncle Steve and yelling about how the government is controlled by sentient oysters? Nope, never seen him in my life. I used the heat gun to get rid of the glue strings and he was ready to prime. At this point I remembered to add in this piece to the hand, the tree lord's viney talons, as if a last instinctual effort from the monster before he succumbs to the worms. I waited till this point so I didn't snap them by accident while building the model. I painted the wood similarly to how I did the original trees, so started with a medium brown. While that was drying, I base coated the parasites in a nice bright blue. I don't use bright colours that often, so I wanted to do something a bit more fun here. Trying to paint all the nooks and crannies of these whilst the brown was still wet had me performing some sort of contortionist routine, so any missed spots we can deal with later. I then base coated the other details like emerald green for the talons and leafy green for our little pal. Then as always I gave everything a nice wash. Darker browns and blacks for the wood, and for the rest, well, you know that wash you mixed up ages ago and you keep trying to use up, and every time you see it when it's dry you think, that did absolutely sweet F all. Why did I even bother? That's the one. We just want to slightly darken the recesses, nothing more. After that I dry brushed the wood in lighter browns and off-whites to bring out the texture and show off the bits, making sure to get some nice highlights on the face too. I dry brushed a lighter version of the blue on the parasites and lighter greens on the other parts. And now is a good time to get the white filled in on the eyeballs so it can dry. Speaking of eyeballs, hey Lex, weren't those big eyeballs like already eyeballs before you painted them? Well, the answer to that is yes, they were. It was very late when I primed it and I just totally forgot to mask them off. But with some acetone, a cotton bud, a dental tool and various threats of violence if it didn't work, I got it all off. Like I did on the base trees, I highlighted some of the Sylvaneth details in Eldari Emerald contrast paint, which I used for the tree monster's eye as well. This is probably a good time to mention that, yes, I'm aware that the head looks a little bit small, but as I always say, scale is only a suggestion. I mixed up some flock and matte Mod Podge to brush onto the bark and create moss, to again tie it into the existing trees as well as represent our grassy leafy cards a little bit more. I made sure to focus it heavily on the bottom and spread it out more towards the top. So now we just need to make him look like he's emerging from the water of the swamp. So I sat him on a silicone mat and mixed up some UV resin to match the colours I'd used on the base. I poured it all around and then swiped it up the sides and into the grooves of the bark, so that it would look like some of the water was still dripping down. While it was wet, I sprinkled in some of the same custom ground scatter I'd used on the base to disguise the edges a little. It would look much more seamless if I did this on the swamp itself. I wanted them to be separate so I could use the base as terrain alone. After curing with the UV torch and proving that my laziness and not wanting to hold it up for minutes at a time is just the thing to inspire a buckaroo style setup to get all the required angles, I moved on to the main event. I tinted more UV resin a nice deep blue and covered all the worms. I wanted them to look really gross and wet and gooey, like his whole insides were just coated in whatever that stuff was from the old Scottish anti-smoking advert from like 1998. I know most of you probably aren't Scottish, and this is a bit of a bloody niche reference, but honestly, watch it. It was iconic. If anyone wants a 3-hour video essay on weird old UK adverts, just let me know. I've got the talking points. Maybe that's a Patreon bonus one day. Getting back on track though, I made sure they had a nice juicy coat of resin all over. I used the torch to cure some resin drips as they fell and coax them into position. This is maybe my favourite part of the whole thing, honestly. With another round of buckaroo, this time on expert difficulty to hit it from above, it was done. I'm so glad to have been able to participate in another Monster Bash. Please check out everyone's videos, I'll link the playlist below. Thank you to my wonderful Patreons for their support, and of course, thank you for watching. If you'd like to support as well, please check out my Patreon, or if you want to like the video, subscribe, comment, etc., all the normal stuff. I'm really hoping to get monetized so that I can continue devoting time to more videos, so anything at all I really appreciate heaps. But with that, I'll see you next time.